the man who washed his hands of Jesus, Pontius Pilate. Some stories begin in the margins, a name, a road, a decision, a mystery history never fully answered. Welcome to One More Record. Today, we follow the story of Pontius Pilate. He governed Judea for about a decade. He commanded soldiers, collected taxes, judged criminals, kept order for the Roman Empire. By the standards of history, he should have been forgotten. Instead, nearly 2,000 years later, his name is still spoken across the world. Not because he won a great battle, not because he discovered new lands, not because he became emperor, but because of a single decision. A decision made over the course of only a few hours. A decision involving one prisoner from Galilee. According to the Gospels, Pontius Pilate repeatedly declared that he could find no basis for the charges against Jesus. Yet before the morning was over, he authorised the sentence that led to the crucifixion. Why? Was he convinced by the accusations, or afraid of the crowd gathering outside? Was he protecting his position, or simply trying to prevent unrest during one of Jerusalem's most dangerous weeks? The image most people remember is simple: a bowl of water, a pair of hands, a symbolic gesture meant to declare innocence. I am innocent of this man's blood. But could Pontius Pilate truly wash away responsibility? Or has history misunderstood the man entirely? The answer lies not only in the pages of the New Testament, but in Roman politics, ancient historians, archaeological discoveries, and a province where one wrong decision could end a governor's career. This is not only the story of the trial of Jesus, it is the story of the Roman official who stood at the centre of it. A man remembered not for the years he governed, but for one morning in Jerusalem. The story begins before sunrise. Jerusalem is already awake. It is the time of Passover. Pilgrims have travelled from across Judea and beyond to celebrate one of Israel's most important festivals. For Rome, it is also a dangerous time. Religious devotion fills the city. National identity runs deep. And when large crowds gather inside narrow streets, even a small disturbance can become something much larger. During festivals such as Passover, the Roman governor would travel from his usual residence in Caesarea Maritima to Jerusalem, not to celebrate, but to keep order. Pontius Pilate had likely made the journey before. He knew the city, he knew its leaders, and he understood how quickly tension could rise. Early that morning, a group of Jewish religious leaders arrived at the governor's headquarters. They were not alone. With them was a prisoner. His name was Jesus of Nazareth. Only hours earlier, Jesus had shared a final meal with his disciples. He had been arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, questioned during the night, and brought before the Jewish council. The Gospel accounts describe accusations involving blasphemy, threats against the temple, and claims about his identity. But when Jesus was brought before Rome, the accusations became political. Luke records that the leaders accused him of misleading the nation, opposing the payment of taxes to Caesar, and declaring himself to be a king. Blasphemy was a religious charge. A Roman governor might have little interest in it. But sedition, resistance to Caesar, and claims of kingship, those demanded attention. According to John, the leaders told Pilate that they were not permitted to carry out the execution they wanted. If Jesus was to be put to death under Roman authority, Pilate had to approve it. Matthew tells us that, early in the morning, the chief priests and elders reached their decision against Jesus. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to the governor. Mark records the same sequence. John adds a striking detail. The religious leaders would not enter Pilate's headquarters because they wished to remain ceremonially clean for the festival. So Pilate came out to them, the Roman governor, stepping outside his own residence, to hear their accusation. What charge are you bringing against this man? At that moment, Pilate may have known little about the prisoner standing before him. He had not walked the roads of Galilee with Jesus. He had not heard the Sermon on the Mount. He had not seen the healings described by his followers. To Pilate, Jesus was another accused man brought before Rome for judgment, or so it seemed, because over the next few hours, the governor would face a decision unlike any other remembered from his career. Before we follow the trial, it is worth pausing for a moment. Who was the man standing before Jesus? Pontius Pilate was the Roman prefect of Judea. He was appointed under Emperor Tiberius and governed the province for roughly 10 years, from around AD 26 to AD 36. His official residence was not Jerusalem. It was Caesarea Maritima, a Roman city on the Mediterranean coast built by Herod the Great. There stood the governor's palace, government buildings, temples, a great harbour connecting Judea to the wider empire. Jerusalem was different. For the Jewish people, it was the spiritual heart of the nation, home to the temple, destination of pilgrims, and from Rome's perspective, a city that demanded constant attention. Pilate's responsibilities were clear: maintain order, collect revenue, enforce Roman law, protect the authority of Caesar. Everything else came after that. Outside the Gospels, two ancient Jewish writers give us valuable glimpses of his rule. Josephus describes several confrontations between Pilate and the people of Judea. On one occasion, Roman troops entered Jerusalem carrying military standards bearing imperial images. Many Jewish people considered such images offensive within the holy city. Protests followed. Pilate initially refused to give way, but when the protesters showed that they were prepared to die rather than accept the standards, he ordered them removed. Josephus also describes another dispute after Pilate used money from the temple treasury to help fund an aqueduct. When crowds protested, soldiers disguised in civilian clothing moved among them. At a signal, they attacked. Some were beaten, some were killed. Philo of Alexandria paints an equally severe picture. He describes Pilate as stubborn, harsh, and unwilling to compromise. Both writers had their own perspectives. Neither was a neutral modern biographer. Even so, their accounts suggest that Pilate was no timid administrator. He was accustomed to conflict. He knew how to use force, and he had already faced serious opposition. That makes the gospel account of the trial all the more interesting. When Jesus stood before him, Pilate did not immediately condemn him. He questioned him, he listened, and according to the Gospels, he repeatedly searched for a way to release him. Why would a governor remembered for severity hesitate over one Galilean prisoner? The trial begins with a question. Pilate looks at Jesus. There are no weapons, no soldiers, no visible signs of rebellion. Yet the leaders insist that he is dangerous. One accusation matters above all the others. "Are you the king of the Jews?" The Gospels record Jesus answering, "You have said so." It is not a plea for mercy, not a denial, not a lengthy defense. While the chief priests and elders continue accusing him, Jesus says almost nothing. Matthew tells us that Pilate is astonished. Most prisoners fight for their lives. Jesus does not. John gives us the longest conversation between the two men. Pilate asks whether Jesus is truly a king. Jesus answers that his kingdom is not of this world. If it were, he says his servants would fight. Pilate presses further. "So you are a king?" Jesus replies that he came into the world to testify to the truth. Then comes one of the most famous questions ever recorded. What is truth? John records the question, but preserves no answer from Jesus. Instead, the governor returns to those waiting outside. He gives his first verdict. "I find no basis for a charge against him." It should have ended there. A Roman governor had examined the prisoner. The accusation had not been proved. The accused should have been released, but the crowd does not leave. The accusations grow louder. Luke alone records that Pilate learns Jesus is from Galilee. Galilee falls under the authority of Herod Antipas, who is also in Jerusalem for the festival. Pilate sends Jesus to him. Perhaps it is an attempt to respect Herod's jurisdiction. Perhaps it is an opportunity to pass the problem elsewhere. Herod questions Jesus. He hopes to see a miracle. Jesus gives him no answer. After mocking him, Herod sends him back. Luke adds a strange detail. Before that day, Pilate and Herod had been enemies. Afterward, they became friends. The decision returns to Pilate. Again, the governor addresses the crowd. He says that he has examined Jesus in their presence. He has found no basis for their charges, neither has Herod. Nothing deserving death has been done. Pilate proposes a compromise. Jesus will be punished, then released. But the crowd refuses. At the festival, the governor had a custom of releasing one prisoner. Pilate offers a choice: Jesus of Nazareth or Barabbas. The Gospels describe Barabbas as a prisoner connected with rebellion and murder during an uprising. Matthew calls him notorious. Pilate may have believed the choice was obvious: a teacher or an insurrectionist. But the crowd calls for Barabbas. Pilate asks, "What then shall I do with Jesus?" The answer comes back: "Crucify him." Mark records the governor asking the most basic question of the entire trial: Why? What evil has he done? No new evidence is offered, only louder voices. Crucify him. Matthew includes a detail found nowhere else. We touched on it briefly in the last episode. While Pilate sits on the judgment seat, a message arrives from his wife. Have nothing to do with that innocent man. She says she has suffered greatly in a dream because of him. The warning adds another reason to hesitate. Still, the pressure continues. John records that Pilate has Jesus flogged. Roman scourging was brutal. Soldiers twist together a crown of thorns. They place it on his head. They cover him with a purple robe. They strike him. They mock him. Hail, King of the Jews! Pilate brings Jesus out again. Behold the man. Perhaps the sight is meant to satisfy the crowd. Perhaps Pilate hopes that punishment will be enough. It is not. The chief priests and officials shout again, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Then the accusation changes. The leaders say that Jesus claimed to be the Son of God. John tells us that when Pilate hears this, he becomes even more afraid. He returns inside. "Where do you come from?" Jesus gives no answer. Pilate reminds him of the authority he holds, the authority to release him or to crucify him. Jesus answers calmly, "You would have no authority over me at all if it had not been given to you from above." The prisoner speaks as though the governor's power has limits. John says that from then on, Pilate tries to release him, but the leaders answer with words that strike at the heart of Roman politics. "If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar." For a governor serving under Tiberius, that was a dangerous accusation. To be presented as disloyal to Caesar could destroy a political career, whether the words were a threat, a warning, or both. The pressure had reached its highest point. Matthew records what happens next. Pilate calls for water. Before the crowd, he washes his hands. "I am innocent of this man's blood. It is your responsibility." The gesture is public, deliberate, memorable, but it changes nothing. Barabbas is released. Jesus is handed over to be crucified. The image of Pilate washing his hands has become one of history's most enduring symbols of avoided responsibility. But the Gospels describe only his words and actions. They do not open his mind. And so the central question remains, if Pilate believed Jesus had done nothing deserving death, why did he condemn him? Part of the answer may lie in the world Pilate governed. Passover brought large crowds into Jerusalem. Roman troops remained alert. The possibility of unrest could never be ignored. Pilate's responsibility was not only to judge one prisoner, it was to prevent disorder across the city. John's Gospel points to the political danger directly. If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. A complaint reaching Rome could end a governor's career, especially if it suggested weakness in the face of a rival king. Some historians see this as the turning point, not because Pilate became convinced of Jesus' guilt, but because releasing him had become politically dangerous. There is another possibility. Pilate may have concluded that one man's life was less important than public order. Roman government did not operate according to modern expectations of justice. Provincial governors held enormous discretion. Peace mattered, loyalty mattered, control mattered. The fate of one condemned man could be treated as secondary. Yet the gospel portrait remains complicated. Again and again, Pilate appears to look for another way. He questions Jesus personally, sends him to Herod, and offers the crowd a choice. Whether those actions reflect conscience, calculation, fear, or some mixture of all three, the text does not say. Some readers see a weak ruler, a man who knows the right decision but lacks the courage to make it. Others see a calculating politician, prepared to sacrifice one prisoner to prevent a wider crisis. Still others see Pilate as exactly what Rome expected him to be. Not a philosopher, not a theologian, but an administrator whose first duty was to maintain order, whatever his motives. The decision becomes irreversible. Jesus is led away. Roman soldiers carry out the sentence, but Pilate does not disappear from the gospel story immediately. He continues to make decisions that shape the final hours. One of them is written above the cross. John records that Pilate orders an inscription. Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. It is written in Hebrew, Latin and Greek, the local language, the language of Rome, and the common language of the Eastern Mediterranean. The chief priests object. They ask Pilate to change the wording. Do not write the King of the Jews. Write that he claimed to be king. Pilate refuses. "What I have written, I have written." It is one of the few moments in the entire account when the governor does not give way. The inscription remains. Hours later, Jesus dies. For Pilate, it should have been another completed execution. Then an unexpected visitor arrives. Joseph of Arimathea, the wealthy council member from our previous record. All four Gospels preserve what happens next. Joseph goes to Pilate and asks for permission to take the body of Jesus. It is a bold request. Crucified bodies could be left exposed as warnings. Burial was not automatic. Mark adds an important detail. Pilate is surprised that Jesus is already dead. Crucifixion could last many hours, sometimes longer. Before granting the request, Pilate summons the centurion responsible for the execution. He asks whether Jesus has truly died. Only after receiving confirmation does he release the body to Joseph. The Roman governor does not assume the sentence has been completed. He verifies it through the officer in charge. Then he gives permission. Joseph takes the body, wraps it in linen, and places it in a tomb cut into the rock. Pilate's involvement could have ended there. But Matthew records one final meeting. The following day, the chief priests and Pharisees return. They remember that Jesus had spoken of rising after 3 days. They fear that his disciples might steal the body and claim he has risen. They ask Pilate to secure the tomb. Pilate agrees. "Go, make it as secure as you know how." The tomb is sealed. A guard is posted. From Rome's perspective, the matter is finished. The prisoner has been executed. The body has been buried. The tomb has been secured. Pilate's responsibility is complete, or so it seems, because the name of Pontius Pilate will outlive the empire he serves. After the burial of Jesus, the Gospels never mention him again. The narrative moves to the empty tomb, the resurrection, and the beginning of the early church. Pilate continues to govern Judea for several more years. Then another confrontation changes everything. The clearest surviving account comes from Josephus. A group of Samaritans gathers near Mount Gerizim. A man has promised to reveal sacred objects supposedly hidden there by Moses. Pilate appears to view the gathering as a potential revolt. He sends troops. Some people are killed. Others are captured. The Samaritan leaders complain to Vitellius, the Roman governor of Syria. This time, the complaint has consequences. Vitellius orders Pilate to return to Rome and answer before Emperor Tiberius. It is the end of his governorship, but before Pilate reaches Rome, Tiberius dies. The emperor who appointed him is gone, and the historical trail begins to fade. No reliable contemporary source tells us what happened next. No confirmed trial, no record of punishment, no account of retirement. Was he dismissed quietly? Did he die soon afterward? We do not know. Sometimes history preserves the great event and loses the ending. Pontius Pilate may be one of the clearest examples. Yet while the written record falls silent, the ground itself eventually provides another piece of evidence. In 1961, archaeologists working at Caesarea Maritima uncovered a block of limestone that had been reused in the Roman theatre. Carved into it was part of a Latin inscription. The stone was damaged. Several letters were missing, but one name could still be recognized: Pontius Pilatus. The inscription also preserved his title, prefect of Judea. For historians, it was a remarkable discovery, not because Pilate had been known only from the Bible. Josephus and Philo had also written about him, but because archaeology had uncovered direct physical evidence from the province he governed. Today, it is known as the Pilate Stone. It remains one of the most important archaeological discoveries connected with the New Testament world. The stone does not tell us what Pilate thought. It does not explain why he condemned Jesus. It does not settle theological questions, but it confirms that the name preserved in the Gospels belonged to a real Roman prefect who governed Judea under Tiberius. Coins minted during Pilate's administration have also survived. Small bronze coins, ordinary objects once passed from hand to hand, used to buy food, pay taxes, conduct daily business. They carried symbols associated with Roman rule. To those who first used them, they were unremarkable. Today they help place Pilate within the material world of first-century Judea, a real governor, issuing real currency, ruling real cities, making decisions that affected real lives. Archaeology cannot reveal conscience, and coins cannot tell us why a man hesitated. History cannot tell us what Pontius Pilate believed that morning. But archaeology confirms that the man standing before Jesus was no legend. He was a real governor, ruling a real province, making a decision that would echo through history. When the reliable record ends, the legends begin. Over the centuries, stories grew around Pilate's fate. Some claimed he was exiled. Others said he took his own life. Medieval European traditions connected him with a mountain in Switzerland, Mount Pilatus, near Lucerne, where legend held that his body was cast into a small lake near the summit. None of these stories can be confirmed. They appear generations and sometimes centuries after Pilate disappeared from history. They tell us more about later imagination than they do about the prefect himself. Other traditions remember him differently. Some Ethiopian Christian traditions came to view Pilate and his wife positively, even suggesting that they eventually believed in Christ. It is a striking contrast to the darker legends of Europe. But once again, there is no reliable early historical evidence confirming the story, and perhaps that uncertainty is fitting. For a man who stood at the centre of one of history's most famous events, his own ending remains almost entirely unknown. History preserves his office, archaeology preserves his name, the Gospels preserve his words. But the final chapter of his life has been lost. His legacy, however, has never disappeared. Millions of Christians still speak his name when reciting the Apostles' Creed. Suffered under Pontius Pilate. Few provincial governors of Rome are remembered so widely, not because of their greatest victory, not because of the cities they built, but because of one decision. Pilate tried to distance himself from that decision. Matthew tells us that he washed his hands before the crowd, a public declaration, a symbolic act, an attempt to say, "I am innocent." Whether he believed those words, only Pilate knew. History remembers something else, not the water, not the basin, not the ceremony, the decision. That may be the greatest irony of all. Pilate spent years governing Judea, settling disputes, collecting taxes, keeping order for Rome. History remembers almost none of it. Instead, it remembers one morning in Jerusalem, a governor, a prisoner, a crowd demanding judgment, and one question that still echoes across the centuries. What if Pontius Pilate had chosen differently? Thank you for joining me on One More Record. Next time, we follow the story of a man remembered for one moment of doubt, a disciple who refused to believe the resurrection until he saw the evidence with his own eyes. History knows him as Doubting Thomas. But is that reputation deserved? This is the story of Thomas the Apostle. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you want more stories like this, forgotten figures, ancient journeys, and mysteries from the edges of history, please like the video and subscribe to One More Record. It helps the channel grow, and it helps us keep uncovering the stories history almost left behind. Until the next journey, this has been One More Record.